that there would be. And then I let her know that I would most likely have that item agendized at the next city council meeting to request that we get a jump start on that. So that's what I have to report. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any other disclosures from GPAC members? Okay, hearing none. The next item is an update on coordination with local tribes. We did talk about tribal resources at the last meeting and received policy direction, but there was a request from the GPAC that we just remind you or go over our notes of what contacts we have had. In May of 2020, so almost a year ago, staff did reach out to the Native American Heritage Commission in Sacramento, which is a state agency, as required by law, for an officially sanctioned list of the tribes who operate in the Hollister area. And they were given a list of 4 tribes, which you see listed here: the Amamutsan Tribal Band, the Amamutsan Tribal Band of Mission San Juan Bautista, and these are 2 separate tribal bands despite their similar names, the Indian Canyon Mutsun Band of Costanoan, and the Sholone Salinan Tribe. Staff did write letters on May 15th to every one of those tribes and has heard back from the Indian Canyon Mutsun Band of Costanoan. Canyon Sayer Roods did come and speak at GPAC meeting number 3. We have also had some minor contact, but no formal response from the Amamutsan Tribal Band. We have not heard from the Tribal Band of Mission San Juan Bautista nor from the Sholone Salinan Tribe, but all of them have received letters letting them know about the process. We are continuing to seek feedback from the tribes on policy options. We have been sending them tribes updates. All 4 tribes have been getting updates at major project milestones. At the previous meeting, there was also a request to be sure that we reach out to the Amamutsan Land Trust. And I just want to let everyone know that it is our understanding that the Amamutsan Land Trust is a project of the Amamutsan Tribal Band. It does have its own website, but the website of the Tribal Band and the Land Trust are closely linked and refer to each other. And the chairman of the Land Trust is also the chairman of the Amamutsan Tribal Band. So our contacts are with the Tribal Band, but those do cover the Land Trust as well. So with that, let me ask if GPAC members have any questions on this. We'll then open it up for any public comment, and then we can close that item. Any GPAC questions?
I do. I mean, what steps do we take if we don't get anything back? I mean, at what point do we invest in that further if we don't hear anything back from some?
Well, at your direction, we could do other things. The law requires that we do the amount of outreach that we've already done. Actually, we only need to write 1 letter, and we have continued to try and reach out. And we do believe that the tribes should know about these meetings. And we did have at least 1 tribal representative at one of the GPAC meetings. So it would be at your discretion if you wanted to ask staff to try and reach out in other ways. And certainly GPAC members themselves would be allowed to reach out on their own if any of you wanted to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely love the idea of reaching out and getting everybody involved. And, especially that's our land's heritage. And it's important to invest in those things. Just, if we don't get responses, how far do you guys take it, I guess, is my question. So I guess you answered that. Thanks.
Yeah, okay. Any other questions from GPAC members?
Yeah, this is Larry Rebecki. Carol is related to one of the tribal leaders. I'm not sure which. Carol, do you know which?
Carol Johnson, is that right?
Yeah, Carol Johnson. She has a cousin that's a tribal leader in one of these bands. I'm not sure which. Is Carol there?
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Do you know which one it is?
Yeah, it's the Tribal Band Land and the Land Trust. I'm not sure. I know that this is I'm related on my father's side, but we are not part, my side of the family is not part of that Amamutsan tribe. So I have no tribal affiliation other than my cousin on his mother's side is Amamutsan. So I know that the tribal band and land trust are one and the same. And I'm not sure if there's just a different group of people who are running the Mission San Juan Bautista portion of the tribal band, but I can definitely make contact with my cousin to get a little bit more clarification on that. And then I'm sure he's been alerted, aware of it, that I'm sure he's received the letters. So I'll just make contact with him and just see if we can't get him to respond. He lives in Sacramento currently.
Right. Yeah, that is the mailing address we have.
Yes.
In Galt.
Yeah, yes, Galt.
Yeah.
Yes, and so he's, a little ways away, but he would be able, if he had any concerns or wanted to voice anything, I could definitely, I think I did give the phone number to somebody. I can't remember who I sent it to. But yeah, I will definitely be in contact with him.
Great, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Any other questions or comments? All right, let me ask if there's any public comment on this matter. And again, I cannot see the comment or hand. So Carrie, maybe you can tell me.
There are no hands raised.
All right, thank you. Any final comments or questions from the GPAC? All right, then we will move on. Where are we here? Okay, so we're going to dive in now on the second and last and much larger issue for the meeting, which are policy options tonight. As I think you know, this is the second of 5 meetings that we'll be looking at policy options for the general plan. We had the very successful meeting last week on the 23rd of March, and we will also have weeks on Tuesday, April 6th and April 13th and April 27th. So those are 3 of the next 4 Tuesday evenings, all at 6 o'clock, all on Zoom. These meetings have been preceded by 2 other public meetings that happened as virtual community workshops held on March 9th and 10th, as well as an online survey that's been open since March 5th and will continue to be open through April 16th. And we have prepared for tonight's meeting a summary of comments received on the items on tonight's agenda. We did a similar summary for the March 23rd meeting, and we'll do them also for the 3 meetings in April. Once we finish these 5 meetings by April 27th, we are also planning a review by the Planning Commission of the GPAC results that will be in May, and then a review by the City Council that will occur in June. At these meetings, we're covering a series of topics. We covered topics 1 through 8 last week, and you see them listed here. Tonight, we are covering topics 9 through 19, most of them related to economic development. That's items 9 through 15. 3 of them related to transportation, which are items 16, 17, and 18. And then the question of inclusionary housing, which is item 19. So you see those all listed here. Our 3rd meeting will cover growth management, special planning areas, and housing designations and land use designations. The 4th meeting will look at arts and culture, and the 5th meeting will cover climate change and natural hazards. And we've been asked to actually add sustainability on that evening also. So Carrie, we might change that on this slide too. But so that's the how these lay out. And again, tonight is items 9 through 19.
Mr. Early,
yes,
real
please.
quick, I think for as far as public comment, I believe there was some correspondence sent in from Mr. Thompson and the BIA, just so we can note it for the record.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. There are 2 items that it's great to note those now, and I might mention them again when we come to them. The first comment of Mr. Thompson gave you a host of background information regarding the some transportation issues that he's been following. And the BIA commented on both school funding, which you talked about at your previous meeting, as well as inclusionary housing, which you'll be speaking about tonight. Thank you for mentioning those. All right. So I'm going to go on then and go into my presentation. I'm going to be talking about all the items this evening. I'll do them all at once, and I encourage any of you, both the audience and the GPAC members, to take notes of any questions you might have. And then I will, together with our sub-consultants, be available to answer questions. We'll take public comment. Any public comment questions that come up can be answered after the public comment, and then we'll go into the GPAC deliberation on these items. So the first set of items are about economic development. And as I mentioned, we have a host of economic development items. The first is just the broad subject of economic development. And then we also have about 6 other subcategories within economic development. So the first of these, economic development in general, looks at what the general plan can do to really spur economic development. And you have already asked us to create an economic development element, focusing on diversifying and adding local jobs, supporting existing businesses, increasing retail options, and supporting the city's fiscal goals. And we have made a list of possible items broadly around economic development to include in the general plan. And you see 8 of them listed here. When we come back to your discussion, I won't read them now, but when we come back to your discussion, we'll actually put them up even in more detail with the exact language that came to you with the policy memo that we gave you. And you'll be able to comment on each of these that you might like us to move forward with. You'll also be looking tonight at retail, what's called retail leakage. That is really retail opportunities for shopping in Hollister. A 2020 market demand analysis found estimated about $26 million in annual spending that occurs outside of city limits by Hollister residents. And we think that's both a function of the fact that so many people work outside of Hollister, so it's probably easy for them to shop during their workday in other communities, but it's also the fact that there is not the same retail inventory, the same number of stores in Hollister that you might find in other communities, particularly Gilroy, or the northern Santa Clara Valley, Morgan Hill, or the Hollister area. So you find those other retail opportunities in those cities instead. So we have some possible policies to include in the general plan to address expansion of retail and shrinking retail leakage. There's 11 of them. We'll be going over them in more detail during your discussion. Next item is job creation. Job growth in Hollister has not really kept pace with population and household growth. Over the last several years before the pandemic, population continued to increase, but job growth did not increase even at the same rate. And I think we all know that there's already many commuters out of Hollister into the surrounding cities. There's a significant inventory of commercial and industrial sites that could accommodate business expansion. And the question here is, what could the city do to enhance job creation opportunities? You'll be looking particularly as part of that at industrial uses, which do account for 20% of all jobs in Hollister today, and which might have a greater capacity to be an even bigger portion. The city already has land that could accommodate 8 million additional square feet of new industrial space. And there is new demand for emerging space, emerging from the cannabis industry, also from some technical industries that have relocated from the Silicon Valley for some types of manufacturing in Hollister. So those are all possible places that jobs, and particularly industrial jobs, might be created. We've got a couple of different ideas for you here, 2 particular ones broadly about job creation and 4 others about industrial job creation. And so we want to talk with you about each of those tonight as well. Tourism also appears to be another big possibility for Hollister. There's an estimate of 21,000 tourists visiting either or both Pinnacles National Park and the Hollister Hills State Vehicular Recreation Area. But Hollister doesn't capture many of those visitors. That's because the 2 highways that serve those areas actually skirt the city. Tourists coming from the south probably don't even come near the city, and those coming from the north can easily go around the downtown and other parts of town. So the general plan could include some tourism-related economic development strategies to increase spending in the city from these visitors. How would we do that? Well, we've got a list of 9 possible strategies that we'd want you to look at and talk to us about whether you think some or all of these might be included in the general plan also. And then we have the airport. The Hollister Municipal Airport is a major asset for economic development, and the number of these is incredible. I believe there's only 6 airports, I heard, in the entire country. It might have been 8, but very, very few that have direct access from privately owned land that can go, as they say, through the fence from outside airport area into an area that is adjacent to the runway. So this is a very rare asset for any airport to have. Hollister does have that. And again, there's less than 10 in the whole country that have this. So the city, we believe, and its general plan might better leverage the airport as a means to enhance business locations and to broaden our economic goals. So we want to hear from you about things that you think the city might do through the general plan to look at the airport as an asset. And we have a list of 4 items here, and we're going to ask you to comment on any and all of those and let us know whether we should include them in the general plan. And then finally, we have cannabis as another industry that is growing in Hollister. The legalization of marijuana has created a new revenue opportunity, both for private businesses and for the city. The city is already encouraging cannabis businesses and expecting $500,000 in cannabis-related business taxes during this current fiscal year. So there's already quite a bit here, and the city's proximity to the Bay Area, the Central Valley, and major highways make it attractive to both the cannabis industry and other industries as well. So we want to ask you if you want us to be encouraging all different types of the cannabis industry in the city, which would include manufacturers, cultivators, retailers, and distributors, and any comments you have about any of those items. So in addition to economic development, you will also be looking at circulation tonight. And the first of the items you'll be looking at are complete streets and safe routes to school. Complete streets are roads that accommodate all users, not just vehicles, but include sidewalks, bike lanes, transit lanes, frequent crosswalks, median islands, and curb extensions. And these complete streets can especially be great ways for kids to get to school, whether it's a kindergartner or all the way up through 12th grade, to walk or bicycle to school. So general plan law actually now requires that you cover complete streets in your general plan. Safe routes to school is a project that Hollister has already participated in. And obviously there are benefits to safe routes to school and complete streets in terms of lowering transportation costs, reducing traffic congestion, and decreasing pedestrian and bicycle collisions. So we want to hear from you tonight about what items you would like to see in the general plan in this regard. Remember, part of this is required by law already, but we want to hear from you about these 3 items, including infrastructure upgrades, transit-friendly street design, and wellness and safety education in local schools. You'll also be talking tonight about vehicular level of service, and this is the way we measure congestion when we do city planning. You're no longer actually required to have a level of service standard for instance, for your environmental impact reports. State law has been changed in that regard, but most communities are continuing to want to pursue good quality level of service because local residents are very concerned about congestion. Your 2005 general plan establishes what's called level of service C as the desired standard for all signalized and unsignalized intersections. And those levels do go all the way from A through F. And it's a little confusing because I think in school, we all learned that A's and B's and marginally C's were the only acceptable grades. And this grading system looks just like a school system. But in fact, many communities do look for D and E, which are often considered acceptable, particularly in highly trafficked areas. So many communities, for example, are allowing level of service D everywhere and level of service E, and occasionally even level of service F in some of their highest traveled areas. So you might want to look here at whether you want to maintain that level of standard. You do have 29 of 37 study intersections that do maintain level of service C, but there are some key intersections that we can talk about if you like that currently aren't at level of service C, that are down in the D or E range, and will honestly be hard to bring back up to that level of service C. So perhaps it would be appropriate to have a little bit of flexibility there. We're looking at 5 different options, and you can choose among those. This is one of those where you do need to choose a single answer to these 5 instead of any and all of them. And then finally, in our transportation discussion, we're going to be asking you to comment on roundabouts. Your city council in 2019 already established that roundabouts may be considered to improve traffic and circulation at some intersections. And the question tonight is whether the circulation element should include a policy to develop roundabouts at existing intersections where capacity, efficiency, or safety problems might be of concern. The last item tonight is going to be inclusionary housing. And I did mention already that you have a letter from the BIA, the Building Industry Association tonight regarding inclusionary housing. I did mention also already that you had a letter regarding circulation issues from Mr. Thompson. On inclusionary housing this evening, I just want to give some background and say that inclusionary housing is a policy that requires all market rate housing developments to provide some measure, some percentage of low and moderate income houses for such owners, for people in those income categories. The intent here is to increase housing affordability, reduce housing segregation, and support state mandated housing targets in your housing element. Developers are sometimes concerned about inclusionary housing because it can impact profit margins and or drive up the price of housing if the costs of those subsidized units are spread across the non-inclusionary units. The Hollister Municipal Code already requires inclusionary housing for conversions of multifamily rental units to market rate units, but you don't have any policies regarding inclusionary in new development. Many communities in the region do have inclusionary requirements. Those include Monterey County, Morgan Hill, Salinas, Watsonville, and San Jose. And we have given you a summary of the kinds of requirements in those communities, and they range across the spectrum among the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about this evening. So the questions that are going to come before you this evening are whether you would like to see an inclusionary housing requirement and or inclusionary incentives included in the general plan at all. And if so, what types of housing would you want that applied to, meaning single family, multifamily, or both? We'd like to know a required percentage of low and very low income and or very low income units that you would want to see included. And we would like to know from you if you would like alternative compliance methods as well. And those include payment of a fee instead of dedicating the housing units, land dedication possibly instead of building the dedicated housing units, off-site construction of the units elsewhere, or whether you want to have no alternative methods and instead require all developers to include these units within their projects. So that concludes my presentation. I'm going to stop the share here just so that we can all see each other better. I can put the slides back up. And just to remind you of the process at this point, we'll have GPAC questions. We'll then open it up for public comment, and then we'll go back and I'll put the slides back up again and we'll walk through all of the individual items. So let me ask now if there are GPAC questions.
David, I have one question on the inclusionary zoning or inclusionary housing matrix that you shared with us. I noticed that what is omitted is inclusionary housing for the low to very low income. Is there any reason for that?
I'm sorry, it broke up a little. Is your question, why is it limited to low and very low income houses?
The matrix stated from low to moderate, but it omitted low to very low income.
You're saying the matrix omitted very low income?
The inclusionary zoning, yes.
I'm going to ask Carrie if she can comment on that. I would imagine that that's because the cities in question don't have, that their requirement is to either provide low or moderate income units and that they do not require very low income units. The other possibility is it's a typo on our part. But Carrie, can you look at the matrix and comment on that?
Yeah, I'm going to open it, so I'll provide a response in a minute, okay?
Okay, why don't we take any other questions, and as Carrie's looking into that, we'll come back, and then we'll come back to you, Commissioner Dubois.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I don't see any other questions. Carrie, if you want a couple more minutes, we could take public comment. Would that be a good idea?
Well, I'm looking at the matrix right now, and for example, Monterey County requires low and very low and moderate. So there are examples of low and very low in this matrix.
Commissioner Huboy, does that comport with the way you're reading the matrix, or are we possibly misunderstanding your
Well,
question?
the intention is to include low to very low income.
So we have couched it in our work with you as giving you options regarding low and very low. It is actually possible that you might even require moderate. My understanding is that the market in Hollister can often provide units that might qualify as moderate, even without any sort of incentive or inclusionary program. But if you wanted us to do exclusively moderate or give options for very low, low, and moderate, that would be possible. It is true that our policy options focus on low and very low.
Okay. We can discuss that at that point of discussion.
Yeah, maybe I can say now, just in case there's any question about this, these are all terms of art and it gets very confusing, but for the record, very low means any household earning 50% or less of the area median income. Low means 50 to 80% of the area median income. Moderate is 80 to 120%, and above moderate is 120% or more. And the standard is that the family should pay no more than 30% of its income for its housing. So if you do all the math on that, you figure out what they make, what is area median income, what is the percentage of that, and then what is 30% of that, and that's how much the housing unit can cost, either in a monthly housing payment for a for sale unit or a monthly rent. All right, I think there are no other GPAC questions, and therefore I'll open it up for public comment. I wanted to point out that Rob Rodriguez had to leave the meeting for a Parks and Recreation Commission meeting, and he did leave 4 comments in the Q&A. Can the committee members see those, or should I read them out?
Mr. Early, I did see them, and I think that is a little distracting, I'll be honest, during the meeting, because I'm trying to listen to you, and they weren't necessarily questions in the Q&A, they were more like comments, and I would just say, just as a reminder, that we should wait until the public comment, because I was getting distracted by that, just to be honest with you.
Right, thank you for that. He did explain in his last comment that he had to leave for a conflicting city meeting at 6:30. So while I understand what you're saying, council member, I'm not sure Mr. Rodriguez is here anymore to hear that comment, and I do understand why he wanted to put those other things in the chat since he had to leave. But your point is well taken. If other members of the audience can wait and just ask their questions orally, I think that will be easier. And in terms of his question about a possible conflict, I believe it is possible that is our last meeting of this series, perhaps also at that same Tuesday of the month that may conflict. And if so, we might, I don't know that we are capable of rescheduling, but we might at least reach out to Mr. Rodriguez in advance and apologize and ask if he has comments to submit. Okay, so those, so you have all gotten to see those from Mr. Rodriguez. And I'm going to just ask if there are others in the audience who would like to make comments. Let me point out to the members of the audience that this is the only comment period on any of the subjects: economic development, circulation, and inclusionary housing. So if you had any comment on any of those items, now would be the time to give those comments. And I see our first audience member who would like to speak, and that's Patricia Saucedo, and she'll be followed by Carol Lenore.
Good evening, Chair and General Plan Task Force members. It's Pat Saucedo with BIA Bay Area. First, let me say thank you for this opportunity to speak with you this evening. You know, BIA Bay Area is very pleased to see the full complement of GPAC members and working with the city consultant to update the general plan. We're very pleased to see that and welcome these opportunities to convey our thoughts and recommendations with you. This evening, my comments are basically in regards to the inclusionary housing. And we did submit a letter, and I did want to just briefly point out that we believe that affordable housing and inclusionary housing policies are not really delivering the amount of affordable housing that's needed to address the housing crises throughout the entire Bay Area, which also includes the city of Hollister. That being said, we don't overtly support inclusionary policies, but we certainly understand that many of our government agencies in our cities throughout the Bay Area have adopted inclusionary policies. And with that in mind, we would like to strongly recommend that, and I wasn't as sure how deep you would get into policy formation for an inclusionary policy, but I really would like to stress that BIA strongly recommends a robust package of alternative options to meet inclusionary requirements. You know, we were in a meeting this week with the city of Fremont, and the executive vice president of Eden Housing made a comment during that Zoom meeting that they are now spending over $750,000 per affordable unit, not including land costs. And that's what we're all facing today. So options and alternatives to meet inclusionary requirements for the market rate home builder is absolutely essential. It creates an incentivized way to generate affordable housing. And we feel that that provides a better placement for the city, for the community, as well as for the market rate home builder. In lieu fees are extremely important for the nonprofit home builder. They look to cities to provide supplanting fees as well as tax credits through the state. And we see that as also a very important component to an inclusionary policy. We look forward to working with the city. We look forward to working with the GPAC committee. And I strongly encourage you look at the alternatives that we listed in our letter. We think many of them, if not all of them, could be very resourceful to create affordable housing. All of these options have been implemented by various cities throughout the Bay Area. And so that's why I picked these to put in the letter. They are options that are already adopted from city to city throughout the entire Bay Area. I will close now and just conclude with saying we look forward to continuing our working relationship with the committee on other items that are coming up in your future agendas. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. I neglected to mention that we are asking speakers to stay at 3 minutes. I think that was maybe a few seconds more, but we'll no problem there, and let's go on. Our next speaker is Carol Lenore.
Hello there. Good evening, everybody. I will be brief. Inclusionary housing, we need it. And since they haven't volunteered it, then of course I support you 100% if you seek out solutions to that. And I did read the other cities. I thought there was some good, well, some didn't have any incentives, but others did. And you could probably work with those. Like I said, everybody knows I lean a little side on the building, the S on the building, but I also want my community to have a well-rounded price of homes. And I think really the only way we'll do that now, and it's around all around us, is to do more aggressive inclusionary housing. And so I wanted to thank you for talking about that. And I certainly support any efforts for inclusionary housing. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands at this time. Just for housekeeping, Carol, maybe you could lower your hand, Carol, and Patricia and Carol could both be removed from the panel. Sorry to use that language, but that's what Zoom calls it. Are there any other folks who would like to raise their hands to comment this evening? All right, I don't see any others. So with that, then we will close the public comment and go back to the GPAC. Are there GPAC members? I'm going to share my screen again, but while I'm doing that, I'm wondering if there are any other questions from GPAC members. Okay, hearing none then. We will go on to the GPAC discussion. And so we're starting back through those same items that I listed before in my presentation. And the first of these are broad economic development policies. And these slides that I have starting here are the actual detailed language that appeared in the policy options document and was published online several weeks ago. So we've got 8 actual policy options here, and then number 9 is to not add any policies or actions. And I want to open it up for GPAC comment on which of these, if any, you would like to see included in the general plan. Don't be shy.
David, this is David Huboy speaking.
Yes, please.
I like a lot of these line items, but I just wanted to mention something the city just recently has been going through in relation to the pandemic. And what I think is important for cities to be resilient at times of hazard, during hazards, to be adaptive and creative, to be able to, and for our situation, I think we, and the city staff deserves a lot of commendation on this, that we were able to, for example, close down the streets and develop parklets through the pandemic. And we also have other issues that I think we can be mindful for preparation, because we have the Calaveras Fault that runs right down San Benito Street. So we need to be prepared for possible disruption to our businesses because of issues such as earthquakes, pandemics, and also, fire hazards and climate change issues. So I don't know if that could be just another line
So perhaps
item.
adding one, something about establishing economic development policies and actions that would help plan for disasters.
Yes, to be prepared, yes.
Great, okay. And we are, of course, taking notes on that, so we can add that as one more, sort of as a number 9 on this list. And if I understood you, Commissioner, just to help to sort of crystallize the conversation, I think you're saying you would probably like to see all the rest of these other 8 in here in the general plan as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. Other comments?
I would, this is Chris. I would agree with what Dave said. It seems like all those things are important things for us, for the city to do to, increase collaboration and stuff. But you're probably going to definitely need, some sort of coordinator in the future to coordinate that growth with those businesses.
All right, so it sounds like, I think that was Chris speaking, right?
Yeah, I mean, you basically have a job description for your coordinator there.
Right, so you're particularly in favor of number 1, but also in support of the other 2 through 8 as well.
Yeah,
as
I mean,
Commissioner
yeah.
Seaboy's ideas. Yeah, great, thank you.
I have some questions.
Yes, please, council member.
So I don't know if I necessarily agree with all of these. Things change over time. We're going to have a new council. We're going to have new ways of doing things. I don't think that we need to develop a position. There might be a different way of doing business better in the future. So I'd like to eliminate 1, 2, 3. And then I guess I'm okay with, because we're already doing these other things, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that's it. But I don't necessarily want to lock us in. How long is this general plan supposed to last? 10, 15 years?
That's correct.
And we're already doing these things. This is a council decision. If we're going to continue relationships or create a position for EDC coordinator, I think the council, whoever's on the council at the time, should make that decision, because there might be a different way of doing things. We could probably contract with somebody who specializes in that. Maybe we do continue the relationship with EDC. Maybe the business council's not around, the San Benito Business Council is not around at that time. There might be a different way of doing things. I would feel more comfortable if we just eliminate 1, 2, and 3, leave that open to the city council at the time. Just keep 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. They're a little bit more general, a little bit more broad, and it doesn't necessarily lock us into having to hire an EDC coordinator position, which we I believe have had before, and the San Benito County Business Council, which we have had relationships with them. And yeah, maybe even go ahead and keep 3, collaborate with local and regional. Maybe even keep 3, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is, and 8 are fine with me, but I'm not very confident or comfortable with 1 and 2.
So
All right.
if I can jump in too, so sort of along the same lines as Councilman Resendez, my question was for those items that obviously are going to require some funding, then I'm just wondering, will that be part of making this decision? And I also kind of had a similar thought around number 1. Not that I don't support it. I do in fact support that function. I don't know whether it has to be a city position or if it should be contracted or whatever, but I do support the function. But what my concern about number 1 is that, is one person enough? It seems like a big job. And if we're going to put that in there, shouldn't we have more? I would rather put something that speaks to the function than say one position, because what if the function requires an expertise in different areas, and really what we need is 3 part-time positions, or we need 1 full-time and 1 half-time that does different things. So I would rather speak to it in the general plan in a way in which we are talking about function rather than positions. And then I think the positions then will come with that. Once we know what functions we need and what we want, what we expect out of those functions, then I think it will become more clear what kinds of positions are needed, and whether the decision comes out of this group or the city council. I don't know. I don't know what the answer to that question is, but I do think that it's more important to have the function reflected in the general plan than actual positions.
Great. Okay. So if I could, just as a suggestion, given what Commissioner Stevens just said, and hearing Councilmember Resendez, but hearing from the other 2 also, perhaps number 1 should focus, as the commissioner just said, on the function of economic development, and would say something like, ensure that economic development is a function that is completed by city staff members under the guidance of the city manager and the other executive staff. I mean, I'm kind of making up words here, but something to that degree, so that staff understands that it is the city's position that we really want to enhance economic development, but not to commit to a specific position like this economic development coordinator.
I'm definitely more comfortable with that, to keep it a little bit general, not so specific. Thank you for that, Commissioner Stevens.
Mr. Early, go ahead.
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Now, my comment was going to be, I agree with what Mr. Resendez was saying. Here in our city, we've been working hard recently, and as I mentioned last time, a very big company came to our community for one reason. They realized that the land they wanted to buy was already had the studies done, everything was ready. So if they pulled the trigger on it, they could build with the approval of the Planning Commission. That was the reason they came. Where other areas of our city haven't had those studies done or completed, our focus really for economic development is making sure some of these areas are ready to go. So when a industrial commercial developer does come in, the studies are completed, so there's not a lag time. To give you an example of this, just up the road, other builders wanted to build some more industrial areas, but they need to go through a few years of studies before they can even do that. So I think the number one thing a city can do, or what we can do, is have those things ready for these developers, commercial, industrial developers, retail, to come in by having it already approved. And then we can lure those businesses in, because if we don't have that part done, that's the foundation. Without the foundation, we really can't accomplish anything. Of course, we're going to have partnerships with the other agencies in our community. We always have. But I think one of the faltering points we had in the past was relying on different groups to try to bring others in rather than understanding the basics, the foundation that need to be set first to really bring those people in. And I think that's where we're at right now. And I think that's probably one of the most important things we can do, because I can tell you, our city staff did an outstanding job once the developer came in and proposed what they were looking to do. And that person made a comment when I spoke to them personally about how impressed he was with the city and how everything fell into place because everything was already approved for that type of a business. So, and in other communities they've tried, it's just taken them years. So that was a key part that we need to get focused on.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that comment as well. So I think
Is
that,
I have a quick question. This is Chris. Is that I mean, those big businesses, when they do come in, they go to the city planning? Is that where they, is that the department that they go to?
I think it would depend on the particular
I guess it's
developer or
a question for the
business.
mayor
They
more.
might come to the city manager's office. They might, if there were a designated economic development staff person or department, they might go there. They might go to the mayor's office or to the mayor himself. In the end, the approvals would have to come through, would be processed by the planning commission and city council, and the staff doing that would be the planning department. But an interested party might first approach the city through any of those other venues that I just said as well.
And that would be correct.
Mr. Early, if I can.
Yeah, please.
All right, so looking at the list, I feel fairly comfortable generalizing the first one, number one. Number two, I don't know why we're specifically saying EDC and the San Benito County Business Council, like the Hollister Downtown Association, the Chamber, they've been around longer than them. Like that's just, it should be implied that we're always gonna do that. So I would just scratch number two. There's no reason to isolate anybody else. Three, I'm perfectly fine with. And then four as well, I think once we commit to like giving funding, I mean, I think that's gotta be up to each city council. And I don't want people to use that for their own business agenda or interest, I guess, because it should be up to the city council on where they want to give funding into who, because times are different and they could change. So I'd scratch number two, scratch number four, and then I would change number one to be a little bit general, not so specific.
Perfect. And that, I think we heard those comments before. It's great you're repeating them. That makes it very clear. And I think from what I could tell, the other committee members so far seem to be in agreement with those points also. I do want to point out that we also heard from Commissioner Huboy an idea for economic planning to plan for potential disasters. And then we heard another comment from the mayor, which I don't think I summarized, but it sounded like working in some way to ensure that there is a supply of land with something close to a pre-approval or an understanding. I don't know exactly how we'll word that, but some supply of land that has some degree of approval or planning already thought out for it to allow a pretty quick turnover or occupation by a user who wants to move to the city.
David?
Yes.
I have a question regarding number 5.
Yes.
Encourage neighborhood serving commercial or commercial office nodes within existing or planned residential areas. Wouldn't that come about after you determine, what areas are zoned for certain uses? So does that really need to be in here?
I think you can make an argument that number 5 isn't really needed. It's true. I mean, I think if you give us this guidance, we might do it in the general plan land use map, and then you don't need to restate it because you'll actually see from us a general plan land use map that will ensure, and you've already done this in many parts of the city, that throughout the city that there are neighborhood serving commercial and office nodes within existing and planned residential areas. So I think you're absolutely right. If that's something you would like us to do, we will do it as part of the general plan, and then we can actually delete it from this list.
I'd like to hear from somebody in planning what they think.
David, regarding that, I think I commented on flexible zoning is important, especially when going through the issue of working at home because of the mandated COVID protocols. I think Carol Johnson raised a good point that could be part of the, when we get into the land use discussion, to encourage that. But I certainly, as a proponent of that, I would specifically be in favor of having commercial and commercial office nodes within existing residential areas.
All right, we will. So yeah, we'll keep this comment, keep this note in here, but perhaps try and do it through our policies that will be in the land use zone.
And I think companies are realizing now that the advantages of having staff members being able to work at home and having home offices.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter, who's visiting, works for an architectural firm in Portland, and she's at home, and she's been working at home and doing quite well remotely from the main office in Portland, for example.
Yeah.
Mr. Early, if I can.
Yes.
What does that mean? What does encourage neighborhood serving commercial or commercial office nodes within existing or planned residential areas? What exactly does that mean?
Well, it really means two things that both Carol and David have already spoken about. One is that on the land use map, as we go to make minor modifications to it from your 2005 plan, we will actually do this thing. We will ensure that there are neighborhood serving commercial and office nodes within the designated both existing and planned residential neighborhoods. So that's the thing we can do on the land use map. And then secondly, as Commissioner Huboy said, we can write policy that says that there should be flexibility within the zoning so that even in an area that's currently designated or will be designated and zoned as residential, that under certain circumstances and with certain findings by the Planning Commission or the City Council, that it would be possible to actually put additional neighborhood serving commercial or office nodes into those residential areas so as to ensure that they really do have a mixture of uses. So again, we can do it both on the land use map and through policy. And once those things are done, again, I don't think we need this policy verbatim in the economic development element.
So I just to shorten the list a little bit, then I would be in favor of eliminating number 5. And then if staff can take note that we can go ahead and include it in the other 2 places that you said.
Yeah, great.
Okay.
Yeah, we will do that. And I am watching the time. I want to help make sure that we move through these this evening.
Can I just make one more quick, just one quick little comment? This is kind of a pet peeve for me, and I just want to put it out there. And then, the rest of the GPAC members can give their opinion. But so this is related to number 7. So I think that an important piece in the general plan is going to be evaluation, and just simply stating that we're going to have a database just for the, just to collect data, I don't think it is enough. So I would like to see something that really speaks to evaluation. So once we have some clear goals set for economic development, that we have an expectation that there's an evaluation of whether or not that project or that effort was really beneficial to the city. I think that that's been missing in a lot of ways. There's one thing to simply make give out reports of a bunch of counts, but there's another thing to give out an analysis and an analysis report and evaluation that really gives a true picture of what's happening. So then we know when we need to, make a change another way or revise something. I think just simply saying to have a database, I don't think that's enough. So that's just my own opinion. I think there always has to be an evaluation component, and I don't see that here.
Okay. We can certainly add that. Just to clarify, the reason for the database, and it probably should have been spelled out here, would be to have an easily accessible set of data or a list of parcels that a developer or an incoming industry might quickly look at and be able to figure out where they might locate or where they might develop. So it's not necessarily the city's job. Once the city has evaluated a certain site as appropriate to have designated in a certain way, it is designated, and the city could within that database evaluate more or less desirable properties. But the goal here is just to have a list that, I mean, it is literally just a database, a list of the available lands, so that applicants or potential users can easily find places where they might locate.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. I mean, I think if there's another place where this can go, but I think that especially when it comes to economic development, that's such an important piece of the general plan. We have to be able to measure what we're doing and have a meaningful measurement, not just simply numbers and counts. So I would like to make sure that if it doesn't belong here, that's fine. But I want to make sure that there is some place where we are addressing some way to evaluate whether or not what we're doing is working and whether it's truly benefiting. And that goes beyond just simply counts. And this will be for the purposes of for the city staff, for the public, for developers. So it will be something that everybody could utilize, but I think that evaluation is a real important piece, and it's not just counts and databases.
Got it. Okay. And I think the two qualities you'd be looking at are, number one, is it an adequate land supply? Do we have enough acreage? And secondly, are the parcels available of the quality that can attract the kind of businesses we want? Is that correct? Are those the two things you would be wanting?
Well, I mean, those are two questions, but I think there could be other questions, right? I mean, when there might be, I mean, we may have like a data set and some other research questions may come up, business questions. And so then we could use that. But I mean, I think that the only way for me to ensure, I shouldn't say for me, the only way that I see that we can ensure that we have that type of analysis or evaluation, if it's somewhere, if it's put in writing in the GPAC, in the general plan. So.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay.
All right, thank you for that. David, go ahead. Commissioner Hubler.
Oh, yeah, just to follow up on the database, since we're looking at not having the economic development coordinator, I think his position was also, once we have this database available, is to being able to recruit businesses by getting the word out there that yes, we do have available land. You know, we're working on, as the mayor had said, you know, doing the preparation studies all in place. It's one thing to have these studies and to have the database, but the other thing is to let developers and business entrepreneurs, etc., know that we do have it. Hollister is ready for you. Please come to our city.
Right. Exactly.
Welcome your business.
If I could just chime in right now after Dave, because I 100% agree with everything he just said, and I know you know, establishing you know, another government position is not something I guess everybody wants to do. But you know, having somebody, I mean, who's going to take care of all that data? Who's going to be able to communicate that with everybody? You know, I know the city council does a great job of working, you know, when people get there, but we, like Dave said, need somebody to kind of go out there and that be their driving force, is keeping our economy developing, you know, whether it you know, whether it grows or it stays the same. You know, there's many different ways of development other than just taking up more land. And so I really think having somebody, you know, that can coordinate with everybody and be a go-to person for this, you know, for the city council. I don't know, you know, if the city planning, if it could be a branch of the city planning department, and so that they would be in the same offices right there. So, I mean, just a thought. Like I said, I agree with everything Dave just said.
I think
we talked about that when I was on the board of the Chamber of Commerce, as being that be a potential work task that we could share commonly with the other board members to get the word out once we have this database. I mean, it can be a shared responsibility. It doesn't have to be one person.
If I can, I think what we talked about is just generalizing it, because you brought up some good points, Mr. Evans. We did have a position like that under planning, and we no longer do. So that is something that I think we should probably just keep very specific, not so specific, and keep it general, because I think it's gonna depend on a lot of different things that are happening at the time. So you're right, we did have a position like that. It did fall under planning, and now we no longer do. So I think we got to be a little bit more flexible and stay open. Don't make it so specific, because times change and things change. And that's what happened with that position. So I think we're going to backtrack. We're just going around in circles if we go back to that again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I do think, thank you for saying that, council member. I think we do have guidance on all of these issues at this point, and we'll certainly add the items both about, I mean, we're going to rewrite number 1 to cover, I think, a lot of Mr. Evans' concerns, to make sure that city staff and city leadership do continue to prioritize economic development, not necessarily through this specific position, but as a way to do the things that are listed here. Implementing the economic development programs, assisting with business attraction and retention, initiating economic development strategies. We'll cover all that. We'll cover the database in number 7. We'll also make sure, as Commissioner Stevens talks about, that there's somewhere in here we talk some about evaluation and making sure that we are aware of the quality of both the database and the land available. And we'll make sure that, as Commissioner Huboy just talked about, that data is really made available to people. I do want to try and move us along if we can, so that we can hopefully accomplish most of our agenda this evening. Are there any last comments on this item? Okay, thank you. Hearing none, this has been great, really good discussion. And again, we're taking careful notes about all of it. I'm going to go on to the next item. If I can get my computer to do that, there it is, which is retail leakage. And we have 5 items listed here that are mentioned as ways to try and address retail leakage and provide more retail opportunities, actively marketing existing vacant retail spaces, considering a parcel tax on buildings that are on vacant buildings, so that people have a financial incentive to not keep them vacant. Creating summary of demographic and economic characteristics to attract retailers, encourage projects in the downtown to incorporate experiential retail and entertainment to boost the downtown as a regional destination, and reducing the number of inactive storefronts in the downtown by trying to put uses into them that are both retail businesses, but also lobbies and other kinds of uses that would activate the street front. Comments about any of these 5?
If I can,
Please.
Thank you. I like them all. I would just say, let's eliminate the example former Kmart, because in, let's say, 15, 20 years from now, we might not have that. But right. I think everything looks good to me.
Great, thank you. And I think you're very right that, yeah, we don't want to get that specific. I very much hope you won't have a vacant former Kmart in 15 years.
Yeah, I agree with Roland as well. I think everything looks great.
Other comments?
So I'll make a comment. So I think that I'm not sure what this would look like, but this piece to me is so tied into the commuter kind of the fact that we are we're like a bedroom community, because we have such a commuter job market, I guess. And it's so tied into that piece that I wonder if there should be some way to link those two things. I'm thinking until we have enough jobs here and people aren't commuting, it's going to be really tough to get people out of their routines of popping into the supermarket where they work at lunchtime because it's more convenient than waiting till they get home. So I think all of these are great. I agree with all of them. I just worry that it may not be enough because it is so tied into the travel pattern, the daily travel patterns of commuters. So I don't know if we could, I don't know how to do that. So I guess I'm asking, you, Mr. Early, and the rest of your staff around how can you make that reflected in this piece, or maybe tie it to some other piece so that we know that the commuter part of our city is so tied into this retail leakage that until we address that piece and have jobs that are here where people aren't commuting so much, that this will continue to be a problem.
Mhm. That's a great question. I'm going to ask Matt or Matt, they're both named Matt from BAE, maybe to try and address that in a moment. Let me say while they're collecting their thoughts that the general plan will also have some background and existing setting information in it. So within that background and existing setting, we can acknowledge the fact that to some degree, the retail situation in Hollister is a reflection of the fact that so many people are commuting out and therefore making a choice to shop in those other locations. But I would also say that, I think for me at least, I feel like I only understand retail habits pre-pandemic, and I don't know that they'll go back to what they were as the pandemic ends, but at least pre-pandemic, a lot of us went shopping on a Saturday or a Sunday when we weren't at work or we weren't necessarily going to work. And many people do shop during the work week while they're at work somewhere else. But I imagine there are a number of people living in Hollister who would have appreciated the possibility of being able to go to various retailers without a long drive, particularly on the weekends when they were otherwise at home. And again, we don't know how those patterns may continue or may change after the pandemic, but I think that's one consideration in terms of trying to create more of a retail base. Matt, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, this is Matt Kota with BAE. So, I think that retail leakage is very often a function of the size of a community. Then the size of the population determines what kinds of retail establishments can be supported. And typically your smaller communities can just support your more basic everyday necessity type of retail. And then as the communities get larger and larger, they can support a more diverse range of retail, adding in more of the specialty type retail and so forth. And, from value or budget oriented offerings up to very high end, fancy things, you typically need a much larger population. So there's sufficient income there to support those. So I think as Hollister continues to grow, you'll naturally see a more diverse base of retail coming to the city. And to the extent that you have more people who work within the city as well as live there instead of traveling out for the day, as David said, you could expect to see more retail being supported within the city. And of course, if we have more people going to these work from home arrangements, then that could be a real benefit to the local retail because people are more captive within Hollister and available during the day, during the work week to do their shopping within the city. So I think this will evolve and there will be certain things that are just simply a function of the size of the community, as well as some influence from where your competition is and how it's located. And we talk a little bit about that in the background analysis. And these are things that are very hard to change just by taking actions that you have within Hollister. But looking for those opportunities to create the types of environment where interesting retail can benefit from having a good synergy with adjacent uses, whether that's housing or offices or business park areas, or tourism attraction, appealing to those visitors to the state parks and so forth that are nearby can also be a way of boosting your retail potential. So these are all things that are, I think, suggested and potentially can help with this aspect.
Thanks, Matt. Any follow-up questions?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I do have the only issue I have is item 2, the ask for additional parcel tax. I don't really want to go down that path. I think as far as the city, what we've been doing now is finally realizing how important our downtown is. We made changes this year. We're going to continue to make changes. So now we have a heart to the community. The residents are responding in a very, very positive way. We're seeing people coming up and they're just really enjoying their town. we're seeing tourists coming through now and stopping because of the outdoor dining and learning about our town. So all these little pieces are starting to happen. And we're also working to incentivize retail. We did this with the hotel industry. We have a second hotel now being built because of the incentives. That is where we're going to move to as far as retail. And we're going to start seeing more of this happening as more people start to work, live, enjoy their downtown, and as more tourists start coming through. So we're making those steps, but I don't want to get into the situation where we're feeling like we're forcing these parcel owners to pay more tax. We're going to at least hopefully incentivize some of these downtown buildings to start realizing the potential of renovating with restaurant space or different things to lure more customers in. So we're going to start seeing that this next year. And so I think we're going down the right path. I'm good with everything. It's just the talk about parcel tax, it just leads to negative conversations. I think at this point, we don't need to go there. We're going to see a big change here in downtown over the next few years.
If
Well,
I can.
And can I just say a quick little comment just to Mayor Resendez? I mean, Mayor Velasquez, number 2 is just asking for a study, and I'm just wondering whether that might be helpful. It's not asking for the actual parcel tax. I'm just wondering whether a study might be useful. And I don't know, I'm just asking that question. I thought it was interesting because I have no clue what the impact of, having that kind of a tax would be. This is something I have no information about. So I just wonder whether a study might be helpful.
And the reason I'm saying that, I've been involved in different studies in the past. There was conversations about additional tax for downtown to try to incentivize and try to create more synergy there. And it just fell flat. And there was a lot of infighting over it and people feeling we're trying to tax our way out of something. And really the answer is motivation through sales. And we're seeing this in downtown now with the parklets, more people enjoying the outdoors. There was a time where people were arguing about the parklets that nobody would want to go outside and eat. And now that they're seeing it, everybody's saying, well, this is what we should have done 20 years ago. Well, it was talked about 20 years ago. So we need to keep moving quickly on our positives. Again, when we start talking taxes, parcel taxes, or any other taxes, people just seem to, it just brings the negativity to it. And I think we're going to work our way through this really quick here in the next year or two.
I also, David, if I may, David Hugh here. I also have a reservation about number 2, and I agree with what Ignacio was saying. It's that number 2 is what Ignacio was illustrating, setting a good example, being a positive, inviting place. Whereas number 2, and who knows what the reason is about a vacant parcel. It's almost like a penalty. It's a negative connotation to it that doesn't sit well with me. I would agree with not having eliminating number 2.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a little bit of a split on number 2, but I'm wondering if others, Councilmember Resendez or other members of the committee want to speak to that.
This is Chris. I'm not big on overly taxing, like you said, landowners and stuff like that on their parcels, but we do have some pieces of Hollister, mainly when you're coming into town, especially right there at the base of Park Hill, that has been empty for years, and we continue to have homeless problems there, and it's kind of seems to be like a vicious cycle. They get settled and tear them out, and nothing's really done with this land. And I know the people would like to know why can't we do something with that? Why isn't something being done? Why isn't the city making something happen about that? Another piece is the one over there behind Kmart and the Taco Bell area. Everything's been empty as long as I've lived in Hollister, California. And I mean, there has been a couple things, but nothing ever gets done with it. And it just ends up being an area for people to congregate and do the wrong things, as we do here in Hollister when you're in high school. Something to get, I know I agree with the negative tone of it, like Dave said, but something's got to be done about those people that just sit on land and just let it rot. there's a couple buildings downtown as well.
If
So
I
that's
can.
just my two cents.
Quick answer to that vacant lot there, Park Hill. It's a fault line. There's an issue with building there, so that's the problem with that property. The other property is privately owned, obviously, in a shopping center area by the same family. They had potential clients that did not go through as far as a restaurant that wanted to go there. And hopefully, again, as we get moving on different things in the next year or two, we're going to start seeing that taken as surely they're negotiating now with the property they have on the bigger space. So we're going to start seeing the changes there.
I
definitely
I like
support.
it. Maybe some incentive then to use those spaces in in an organic way. Maybe that doesn't include building on it. We have great people that around our area that will come in and do like a taco truck alley or something like that, and maybe incentives to use those properties occasionally. Gathering spaces or something positive rather than just letting it sit or taxing
Those conversations are being had now. So
Well, and that's an interesting point, though. I mean, I think we're hearing that because Member Evans also just said he wasn't a big proponent of taxing. So I think number 2 maybe should come off the table, but perhaps number 1, while we eliminate the reference to the specific site, it could be to actively market those vacant, both retail spaces and parcels, to both potential businesses, but also some alternative uses, like Member Evans just said. I think we could broaden number 1 to include some of those other ideas.
That sounds like a fair compromise. I'd be in support of eliminating number 2 and going with that. Just keep in mind, before the pandemic, retail was already in trouble. It was because of the online internet sales. People are looking for experiences. So I think our focus, as Mr. Kota, is that how you say your name?
Kota.
Mr. Kota had said, is going to be like an experience-based tourism. And if you get that traffic here in Hollister, those vacant parcels are naturally going to fill up. You'll see it happen, but I think that's where our focus should be. It's not about retail. And I do, just speaking to Ms. Stevens' other point, maybe we can and also put some language in there to encourage like telecommuting or something, because that might help. And I think, again, it's still early, but we're going to see a lot of these things happen just because of the pandemic. No, we didn't have Instacart. We didn't know what Zoom was. We didn't have these things before. A lot of people are not even going to go back to work. And that was reflective in our sales tax during the pandemic. I think it's going to stay like that. So that's all I have to say. Thanks.
I'm good with that. I mean, I think I'm good with going with everybody else's. I mean, I think the important piece is to have as much information, especially if this is an area where we feel like as I said, I feel like this is just an area that I don't really understand. I know that there's going to be different reasons why different areas are vacant and why some of them are vacant for so long, like what Mayor said earlier about the fault line. I had no clue about that piece. So that's an important piece of information, because then it just becomes something that you have to address in a different way. So I think as long as the actively market existing vacant retail spaces includes a lot of information seeking, and then that somehow it gets incorporated in some of the decisions that are made, I think that will work. So I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the comment about the fault, because that is such a big issue through much of the downtown. It may be that we can come back and look at this as we develop the policies, but we may want to actually have a specific policy or action about trying to do something to create alternatives or create approaches to developing on or near the fault line, so that we really have some economic development tools to accommodate the fact that the fault line is right there. I know it's been an issue for a number of property owners in the city. With that, I think we've got good direction. We're going to make some changes to number 1. We're going to eliminate number 2. I think 3, 4, and 5 will stay about as they are. And if you're ready, we could move along. Sounds like you're ready. Just a little time check. We've now done 2 items out of 10 or 11. And we've gone about 40 minutes. So we do have another slide here with 6 other items regarding retail leakage. Let me ask if there are any comments on these before we go on to our third topic.
Bid, the number 11 is pretty similar to number 2, the bid district. And that's kind of what I was referring to earlier. There was a lot of conversations about that in the mid 2000s, and a lot of resentment came out of that. It's not that we have to completely shelve the idea, but I think, again, I think we're moving into a new time now with more of the parklets, and I think more of the business owners or property owners are now looking towards figuring out how they can use some of that additional space. So that's, I think we're moving in a good direction there.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if we can tap into existing groups, I think that would be better. So
So
I
it
think
sounds like
number
we'll drop
11.
number 11.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah.
Okay. And 6 through 10, shall we go ahead and keep them?
I think so.
Fine.
Great. Okay, so we'll go on. The next item is job creation. The good news here is we only have 2 ideas for you to consider, so not quite as long a list. Identifying and marketing the city to potential businesses located and potentially locating here, and improving collaboration between the city and existing businesses to better understand business needs, with the goal of then understanding how to attract new ones as well. Thoughts about these?
We can choose one or both. I'm fine with both.
Yeah.
Fine.
Everybody okay here?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
All right. This is where we just caught up a lot of time. That's great. Thank you. Industrial uses. We just have the 4 here that are, again, you can choose any or all of these. Identifying gaps within existing sectors to try and attract other companies in missing categories. Enhancing existing business clusters that already exist and trying to bring businesses in that are within those clusters. Creating a plan or plans for industrial and business parks. These are physical plans to improve them and understand how they might be used, and reducing or delaying impact fee payments for industrial developments to attract them to come in.
I don't think we need number 4. As I mentioned earlier, the company that did come in, the impact fees they felt were fair. All that was fair. They just wanted to be able to get their approvals and move in and constructing their facility. So I think just understanding what manufacturers want is what we need to be focused on.
Okay. And so, Mr. Mayor, in addition to eliminating number 4, if that's what the committee agrees to, I think you've also implicitly suggested maybe an action just to ensure that the city has a process to quickly approve and allow to get running any business that does want to come in.
Correct, as I mentioned earlier, yes.
Yeah. All right, so we'd eliminate number 4, perhaps replace it with the things that the mayor just talked about, and I think keep 1, 2, and 3 as they are.
If I can, I don't like being so specific because we don't know what the future has in store. I don't know if we need to identify existing gaps and then go after those, because what if those gaps are like non-existent or they're not the industry that we want here? There's some cities that have specific industry and they grow just within that industry. I don't know if we can just generalize that a little bit. I'd be comfortable with that.
Right. Well, number 2 points to, I mean, number 1 and number 2 are kind of 2 separate strategies that do 2 different things, but related. Number 1 is saying if you've got a gap, maybe you can fill it. And number 2 says you also do have, the definition of a gap is that there are these clusters of businesses you do have, and it's reasonable to think you can attract more in those as well. And it's certainly true that the gaps might change from time to time. But I think number 1, if number 1 doesn't say what the gaps are, number 1 just says, maybe it should say, can identify them on an ongoing basis so that you can ascertain whether or not there may be a market potential in current gaps that you may have. So we could do a little wordsmithing there if that would help.
Sure.
Yeah, I like the idea of an ongoing, like you're constantly monitoring what the need is or what the gap, and I mean, we're using the word gap, but in general, it's kind of like, what's the need out there? What can we, you know, how can we fill whatever that need is? And that may also mean it's a gap. But I'd like the idea of ongoing identification.
All right. Okay. So any further comments there? I think we have direction on this one. Hearing none, I will go on. Tourism, we've got 9 ideas here. And I think, we already heard several of you talk about tourism being an important economic development strategy for the city. So I'm not going to try and read all of these, but why don't you all remind yourselves of them, and then let us know if any or all of these seem appropriate or not appropriate to include.
The only two I would say is on number 7, I think we're working with the local groups. I don't know if we want to demand that there be more contributions. We work directly with the Downtown Association and of course with the chamber, but I don't want to have something that says we have to increase contributions there. I think we work with each other, and that's how we should be doing it. And we do help them financially, but I don't want to be in a situation where we feel we have to keep increasing that. Number 8 is already being done.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I could ask on those, on number 7, would it be okay with you to say something more like continue to work with local tourism entities?
Yes, absolutely. Yes,
such
absolutely.
as, okay. And on number 8, do you think it should just be struck altogether, or would it also be continue to work to attract more
continue to
hotels?
work on our the strategies currently implemented by the city.
Great.
Yeah, I think like using some words like sustaining, maintaining. So like the strategies piece, like those kind of words rather than implement, I think that's good because it just continues that. And then for number 7, my question around that was in contributions, are we only talking about financial contributions? Because there may be other ways. So I don't know. I mean, maybe there's other words, or maybe making that just a little bit more clear about what types of contributions are we talking about.
I would agree with the mayor and just strike that number 7 altogether. I think it should be up to the council. Again, things change, and we should look at that as a case-by-case basis as their contracts come up. And then that's my opinion on that. And then I was just wondering if we can combine 2, 4, and 5. They seem like they all fall in like the same category. Can we just combine them so we don't have, because I think they're great.
I would urge you that 2, 4, and 5 are actually pretty different from each other. And I mean, I want you all to have a kind of an action-oriented list when you're done with this general plan, and that you can check things off. And I think creating the brand is one thing, putting signs up along roadways is another thing. And highlighting the downtown, perhaps you could incorporate into both 2 and 4, but I think certainly the brand and the signage are 2 very different things that would be done separately.
Okay. So fair enough. Maybe we combine 4 and 5 and then leave 2 separate.
Mm-hmm.
Regarding number 2, I know a lot of work already has gone into a unique brand, and the Chamber of Commerce put a lot of time and effort into that. You may want to revisit the brand that they established and consider it for the possibility for the city.
Good. It's good to have that information, and we'll continue.
This is Chris. I appreciate number 2 as well, creating a unique brand for the city. I had to spend some time in the Clovis, Fresno area, living there for a while, and they have a gateway to the Sierras as their kind of brand in downtown. And I think that with having Pinnacles and Hollister Hills and the beautiful landscape that we do have and the country that we do have here, a specific brand is something I think would be awesome for us.
Okay, any other comments here? I think we've got some good input here. We will combine for.
I would just like to go back to number 7 again.
Yeah.
I agree with Councilman Resendez that the contribution piece, if we're only talking about monetary or we're talking about dollars, that probably is a city council issue. And to put that in the general plan that's going to be in existence for like 20 years, it doesn't make sense, because maybe they increase it today. And does that mean that we're going to expect them to increase it like all the time until the end? I really do think that it should be more specific. If we're talking about money, then I think that, yeah, we should eliminate it. But if we're talking about some other things, because there's other ways the cities contribute, and part of it is the way that we work with them, I do think that there should always be an expectation that there's some kind of collaboration among those groups. I wouldn't mind seeing something that reflects that there should be some kind of collaboration among all those groups. But I do think that if contributions is talking about, if all we're talking about is money, and I agree it doesn't belong here. And so that's why I think we should be more specific about that. And rather, if we strike it, if we're talking about money, strike it. If we're talking about relationships, I think that should be on there, that should be some sort of an expectation.
What I had heard sort of as the emerging consensus for number 7 was to keep it, but to change the words to something like continue to collaborate with local tourism-oriented entities, such as the Chamber, the Visitors Bureau downtown.
David, would it be possible to combine number 2 and number 7 with the word change?
I think again, I think 2 is a very specific thing to do. I think 7 is a little more broad. It might better occur a little higher up on the list, but I do think that I'd like you to keep number 2 as a relatively specific thing that you can at some point check off a list.
My concern with number 7 is exactly what you said, Roxanne, that let's say the chamber is not necessarily doing something that we agree with as a city, and they're going to say, your general plan says that you're going to increase the city's contribution, and they're going to kind of hold our feet to the fire with that to renew their contract. But I don't feel comfortable with that. I'd rather just base it on like measurable outcomes. Like, okay, well, what did you say you were going to do in the last contract? Did you meet those requirements? Let's base it on that. Not because our general plan says that, because anybody can hold a position, but they're not really doing the job. You know what I mean?
Well, the guidance I thought that we already gotten was to delete the words increase the city's contribution and to replace that with something akin to continue to collaborate with local tourism-oriented entities. So you would be keeping a number 7, but it would not speak to making contributions, nor to increasing them, nor to contributions to specific entities. So this notion of contributions, whether financial or otherwise, would be eliminated.
Then can we eliminate the examples as well? Just keep it a little bit more.
Sure. It could just say continue to collaborate with local tourism-oriented entities.
Thank you.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay, great. All right, have we finished up on this one? Someone say yes.
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 Thank you. All right. We will go on to the airport. So as I mentioned, the airport does have, it's obviously a facility, an important facility unto itself, and it has the very specific advantageous attribute of having this direct access to the flight line, which is very rare at airports across the country. We have 4 items here in terms of recruiting aviation-related companies, incentivizing additional development of industrial and aviation-related uses at the airport, allocating city and other funds to support additional upgrades, and marketing the airport as an amenity to future businesses. Comments?
That's fine with me. We're currently doing most of that at the city now. So I'm fine with this.
Looks good.
Looks good to me.
I agree. Looks great.
I like it too.
Sounds good. All right, we will go on then. I love that we're catching up with ourselves. So the last one under economic development is cannabis. And these are, we've got 3 overall categories here of ways that the city could encourage the cannabis industry. The first looks at manufacturers, talks about removing land use restrictions, marketing existing opportunity sites, waiving fees and or financial incentives. Similar ways that you could work with cultivators. And then number 3 looks at retailers and distributors. Any comments on these?
Yeah, I do have comments on this. We currently have a very fair process for cannabis, but what we've found over the last few years is many of these companies came in to get licenses, but really had no intention of ever setting up shop here. They just needed the license so they can move on to get their state permission to sell in different areas. So we haven't, and I think a lot of cities are having this problem. It's really, the industry has turned into a race to the cheapest place to do business. And I don't think waiving fees or other incentives is really wise. We found a lot of people taking properties and then really not coming through with their projects. And all they needed was the license, the approval from the city to really sell in other areas. And they found this to be one of the easiest places to do that type of business licensing. And really we got left with not much to show for it. So I don't want to be involved in something that's just trying to offer more incentives or trying to recruit more. We have several companies now that, as I said, are licensed, but really aren't doing anything.
If I can, I agree. I don't know why we have to have a specific category for cannabis, because there's so much different industries, right? Again, the current council has been very pro cannabis, and we've supported the cannabis industry. But I think if that were to change in the future, we want to be open to other industries and not just. I don't know why we're specifically talking about cannabis. I don't think we should have a category for it.
Yeah, it is. It's very true that it is a particular industry, and you don't really have categories for other industrial industries here.
Right.
So,
it
sounds like at least the 2 council members are suggesting that these be eliminated. Any comment from others?
I would agree to remove it.
I've heard 3.
I'm neutral on this. I mean, I think, yeah, I'm okay either way. I kind of agree though that I don't know why we have this as a specific. I think if there's something that comes across to the city that seems to be, a benefit to the city and maybe will in the long run be good for Hollister, and it happens to be cannabis related, then that's great. But I'm not sure that we need this specific category.
So for the record, it sounds like we're moving towards eliminating this. I just, in case there's a person from the industry listening in tonight, I think I heard both the mayor and Councilmember Resendez say that the council is strongly supportive of this industry. It just doesn't make sense to call it out specifically in the general plan. I don't want this guidance tonight to be construed by anyone to think that the city or the council are not in support of the industry. It's just feeling like it doesn't rise to having any discrete treatment any different than any other industry.
And thank you for that, because again, we were one of the first communities that allowed this to come in. We had long conversations. We drafted a good policy, and it's there, but I don't see it as something we're discouraging, but I don't think it has to be on its own in the general plan. It's licensed, they can do it here, not a problem. And we're going to keep down that path, but to single it out, I don't see the reason for it.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think we can go on then. And I think we suddenly have made up so much time that we're actually back on schedule. We have about 40 minutes left in the meeting, and we have we're complete with economic development. We have 3 transportation items, and then the inclusionary housing, which I anticipate might be a bit of a discussion. So with your permission, I'm going to try and move us through the transportation issues in about 20 minutes to leave about 20 minutes for inclusionary housing. All right, so the first of the items under transportation are complete streets and safe routes to school. We've suggested 3 items here that would look at how to encourage complete streets and safe routes to school, supporting infrastructure upgrades, promoting transit-friendly street design, and promoting wellness and safety education in local schools. Any comments here?
Agree.
100%. If we could do more, I would do more.
Well, Frederick is here, and perhaps he can give us, not tonight, but if with that encouragement, maybe we can think of even more things and get them into the draft plan itself for you. But other comments?
Yeah, as we talked about in the previous meeting, the idea of making parkways encircling the city so there's a safe passage. And it's really important to me that we have a safe passage from any development from that development all the way to the schools and to the downtown. And we should not stray from that again, because that has caused us major problems in the past.
Great, thank you for that comment. I did want to mention that we did hear that comment last time, and we did a little research. The city of Watsonville has a very comprehensive trails plan that we're going to get a copy of to you, or a link to it. It has a single map in it. That's sort of the basis of the plan. And then it's about 150 pages of text of various design ideas, implementation actions, and so forth to create such a network in Watsonville. And it may be an appropriate implementation measure to do a plan like that here in Hollister.
Yeah, I would like, this is Chris. I would like to chime in and just say I agree with the mayor that, you know, having safe streets and routes to get to school is vital for us in our community. So thank you, Mayor, for keeping on pushing that, brother.
Thank you, Chris.
Mr. Early, if I can make a suggestion.
Yeah, please.
It looks like Veronica Lezama from COG is on, and she actually works with complete streets and safe routes to school for the county. If we can connect with her and see what other suggestions she has, if she hasn't already put some input, like, I think that would be good. The more, the merrier, to be honest.
Yes, we'll be happy to reach out to her. Thank you for pointing that out.
And can I just ask a question about this one? Because I think that I kind of agree with Councilman Resendez that I think we can do more in this area. And obviously the safe route to school is a priority, and that has to be highlighted. And I would also like to see, just in general, the idea of having the city be more walkable and that it be safe to do that. So not just simply for routes to school. First of all, kids aren't just walking to school, they're doing other things that require walking. And then there's other people, our elderly, just adults who are trying to stay fit are walking. So I would encourage you to make this a little bit more robust, to include not just the safe routes to school, but other things where kids may be walking or biking, and as well as other people. So I would like to see it to be a little bit more robust, in fact, if that's possible.
I think we can definitely work on that. All right. Any other comments here on complete streets and safe routes to school?
Would this include signage in neighborhoods and near schools for speed limits and possibly more stop signs?
Yes, we can look at that. I was going to mention
Sierra Vista School, and it's crazy over here.
We did receive a comment in the chat about that. One of the things that some cities also do is just try and work collaboratively with the school districts regarding some of those issues of drop-offs. There are a number of other innovative programs. There's something called, for instance, a walking school bus, where parents join together and one parent, say one day a week, walks with a group of kids to the school, so that those kids as a group can safely walk instead of all needing to be driven individually. There are some limitations about how stop signs can be used and how low you can lower a speed limit relative to the design of the street, but you can also establish special school speed zones, and there are times when stop signs and other measures are warranted. So we can look at all of those things, and I appreciate that broadening of some of the things we're looking at. We also had another comment, this one in the Q&A as opposed to the chat, where Mr. Rodriguez said that sidewalks should include buffers between what I would call a planting strip between the paved roadway and the sidewalk itself. So that's another idea that we might look at here as part of this. And we'll definitely reach out to the COG as well to get additional ideas.
I'm
Yeah.
glad that David.
Oh, sorry, Dave, go ahead.
I'm glad you mentioned that because the street design to me is paramount to not only just for being transit friendly, but also for pedestrian protection, as you mentioned, having a mitigating planting strip between the sidewalk and the curb with street trees and landscaping to me is extremely important.
Yeah, and I was gonna say the exact same thing that Dave just said. You know, having that buffer, and I think is important. I know hopefully things are planned for 25 as far as trees and things like that here in the city. But again, I'll reference the city of Clovis does a great job of having those walk spaces and, you know, buffered areas that have trees and all the heritage trees that we talked about from the previous meeting. And so having that street design is huge, like Dave said, to have that space, and like Mr. Rodriguez said as well.
All right, any other comments here?
Mr. Early, as we talked about the parkways and different things, and we at the city have been really pushing to make sure that all these new areas have protected bike lanes or walkways, so we don't have this issue any longer. Instead of just making 4-lane roads, that we can have 2-lane with protected bike lanes. So I think that, again, this is going to be really very important, because this has been an issue, an ongoing issue where it's always put off to, we'll do it the next development. So this is critically important for us to get to that point where our residents, not as Ms. Stevenson pointed out, not just our children going to school, but our elderly families walking after work in a safe way where they know they're not going to be run down.
Great, thank you for that comment. I really hear the commitment from the city council on down to ensure that the city really does do a very comprehensive job of planning for complete streets, for bicyclists, for pedestrians, and for safe routes to school throughout the city. All right, shall we move on? The next item is level of service. You'll recall that you actually no longer are required to have a level of service standard at all. The California Environmental Quality Act has been amended so that now in environmental impact reports, we assess vehicle miles traveled instead of level of service. But nonetheless, many cities are continuing to have a level of service standard because many residents are concerned about congestion. In Hollister, you've historically had a standard of level of service C for all intersections. It's difficult to maintain that standard in some congested areas. Some people would argue it's not even desirable. In a place like a downtown, you actually want a little congestion because you want people to feel that there's liveliness. Quick flowing, free flowing traffic can be less conducive to biking and walking. And in some places, particularly where you have a major roadway, for instance, leaving town, as you get out on Highway 25 and move through some of the final intersections at the northwest corner of town, it may be very difficult to maintain that level of standard, that level of service standard, just because of the large amount of traffic moving through a relatively narrow space. So while you certainly could continue with LOSC, as number 1 here says, we're suggesting some other possibilities. D and E are in many jurisdictions have found them to be acceptable. And so we're suggesting in number 2 that you might allow LOS, D, and E in places where it's harder to minimize congestion, such as the downtown or major commuter ways. D are allowing just establishing D or E in general instead of LOSC in most places. Number 3 is having D or E in general. And then number 4 is kind of a different way of thinking about it, which is that we have heard from the public that good level of service is very important on the commuter corridors, and perhaps those are places where you would try and maintain level of service C. But it's important to note here what the sentence on number 4 says, that what that really does is require a pretty large scale widening of streets, particularly moving large amounts of traffic out of town. And then number 5 would be just to eliminate this level of service standard altogether, because it's not required anymore to have it in order to implement CEQA. And you could take this all the way out of your general plan and still be in compliance with the law. Thoughts or comments? This is one where you have to choose one as opposed to just saying they all look good.
I like your recommendation of the level D and E for some of the different areas of town.
So number 2.
Probably number 2 would be the answer. And I can, the perfect example again is downtown. One of the biggest reasons we couldn't change downtown was because people didn't want to be slowed down. They wanted to drive through downtown as quickly as possible to get home. And we kept pointing out, if we did not slow down traffic, we would never have a viable downtown. And now we're seeing that. And I think it's a great example of where it makes sense for D&E in some certain areas. So I would go with number 2.
I agree with Mayor Ignacio. Number 2 is the one that I was looking at as the best option.
If we do keep the level of service, I would support that too, because again, the downtown area, we've had that be pretty high, but it doesn't make sense to do it like for a new development or something. But I'm curious to hear from planning staff. What do you guys think about just eliminating it altogether, Abraham? Like, do we even need this anymore? Should we just?
And that was going to be my question, Councilmember Sendes, is what does that mean? So if we eliminate that, then what does that mean? I mean, what's the impact, and do we just make a decision about the level based on the development, based on the traffic flow of that certain area, or what would that mean? So
IR, but Abraham, maybe you could speak to that. I don't know. What do you think?
I think Abraham can, and I would encourage you to hear from Frederick, and I might add a couple comments at the end also.
Yes. Thank you, Councilmember Sendes and David. Yeah, definitely. We have been talking about this in the past with David Early and also with Frederick from Kimberly Horn, our traffic consultant. And having the level of service actually helps us understand the intersections. Once a study is made, we know what type of intersection we have in regards to what the waiting time is, and it helps us understand a little bit more in regards to where we're at as a community now, and if we have additional potential projects that are coming in the pipeline, that we can assess it and analyze what the potential impact would be in the future as well. So we have talked about it, and it would be nice to actually keep it.
I can add, and Frederick, I'm sure has something to add too, but it does also give you a basis for creating a nexus and a nexus fee study, and then collecting traffic impact fees. So if you don't have a level of service standard, particularly in places where it is of some concern, you don't have a basis for requiring funds to pay for improvements to maintain those levels of service. So it actually, a hybrid between 2 and 5 would be to say, we no longer have a level of service standard in the downtown. Perhaps, on San Benito Street from, I'm not sure what streets you would say, but somewhere right through the downtown, you might let go, you might not just lower it to D or E, but you might say we actually have no standard for those certain intersections. But I think once you get further outside of the downtown, whether it's in a residential neighborhood or on the commute corridors leaving town, to have some standard does give you a basis for impact fees as development occurs.
Well, thank you for that explanation. I appreciate that. I didn't even know that it was eliminated. I'm used to seeing the LOS. So thank you for explaining that. And yeah, I'm with the majority on this one.
All right. Well,
David, if I may just say, if Hollister was not a growing city, right? If it was like San Francisco, Pasadena, I would say, get rid of level of service. But because you are growing, a development's going to come in, and that development, you need to tell that developer where your street's going to join on Buena Vista or on San Felipe or on Fairview, we're going to need a signal for people to cross safely, right? And the only way to determine if there's a signal or a stop is to do level of service. So that's why, because you're a growing city, I think it's important to maintain level of service.
All right, I think we've got direction here.
I would agree. I would agree with number 2.
Yeah, and I think, if with your permission, we might talk with Frederick further about whether there is a limited portion of the downtown right along San Benito Street and some of the cross streets where perhaps there is no standard. But I think otherwise we'll go with number 2, possibly with that one small exception.
Sure.
All right, so then the last transportation item is roundabouts. And this one's pretty, again, you have to choose yes or no. But would you like us to include a policy that the city would try and develop roundabouts at existing intersections if there are capacity, efficiency, or safety problems that perhaps in many cases could make a traffic signal less advantageous than a roundabout?
So we have approved a policy at the city for this. So I would say, yes, we need to continue with that.
I agree, but we already have one, so maybe change.
So to some degree, this would be memorializing in the general plan. That, you know, it's interesting. The general plan is meant to be the foundation for your other policies. So particularly if you do want to continue with that policy you've already put in place, you should put it into your general plan so that you have that foundation for the thing you're already doing through your other policies.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think yes is the answer.
That was an easy one. That's great. So we actually have about 25 minutes left to talk about inclusionary housing. And I know this is a complicated subject. So let me just go through the questions and then we'll come back and go through each of them one by one. And just to point out again, we didn't try and go over it all, but Carrie and others can answer questions if you have any questions about the matrix we gave you, showing the inclusionary programs in other neighboring jurisdictions. They all essentially have their various answers to these questions. So the first question is, should there be an inclusionary housing requirement at all? And the possible answers are, yes, it should be a requirement. Or number 2, it wouldn't necessarily be a requirement, but it would be incentives so that if you do certain things, if you do voluntarily have an inclusionary housing component in your project as a developer, then you would get, say, a density increase or reduced setback. And then number 3 is to have neither a requirement nor an incentive for inclusionary housing. So that first one is just sort of the watershed question of, do we want it or not? Then the other questions, if you answer no, if you chose number 3 there, then you really would be done with the rest of the discussion. But if you do move forward, whether it's a requirement or a voluntary incentive-based program, the next question is, what types of development should it occur to? And the examples there are single family, multifamily, or both. And then going on to the next slide, what is the percentage? And we did say low and very low income units. They could include moderate. And if you look at the individual programs, some of them are very particular that it's X% low, X% very low, X% moderate. So you might want to give us guidance of very specific percentages, or as you'll see, some jurisdictions just say it could be low or very low, or it could be low or moderate of a certain number of percentage. So, and those numbers generally range from 10 to 20%. I do want to point out as part of this that although these are the ranges, and I don't know that I would suggest going any higher, I don't want you to think that this by itself meets the full need for affordable housing, because the populations that need very low and low income units in our communities, and this is really true across the state, are more like 40 or 50% of the households. So it's really, we found that inclusionary programs can only provide 10 to 15 to 20%. So you can't really demand more, or projects really do become infeasible. But you should understand that this meets only a portion of the actual need within your community. And that's not particular to Hollister, that's everywhere in the state. But again, so the next question is, what is that percentage? And then the last question is, whether if you do create such a program, are there going to be alternative compliance methods? And we've got 3 of them listed here, and you could do any combination of them, or in number 4, you could do none. But you could also have any combination of an in lieu housing fee, which is to say, instead of the units, you pay money into a fund. A second one would be dedicating land. So someone else would build the housing using either those in lieu fees or other funding sources. But the city would take control of the land and then turn it over to a different affordable housing developer. Or number 3 is allowing a developer to construct their units not within the subdivision or development in question, but somewhere else within the city. And cities and counties do all combinations of these. You can choose, in this case, you can choose either one or two or three or any combination of them or none of the above. So there's a lot of questions here. We've got about 20 minutes, and I think we should go through them one by one and get your guidance on each of them.
So if I could go ahead and start there, if you can go back to the beginning.
This is
perfect. So I can tell you absolutely this is something I've been passionate about for years and having a hard time making it happen here. But number one would be number one for me. On the second question would be number three. On the percentage, I would tell you 17%. And on the alternative methods, I would say no, we should not. In the past, in our community, it's been pushing off any low-income developments to one side of town, which has caused problems. I would like to see communities mixed together, so no one group is singled out and everybody feels like it is their community, it's their neighborhood. It's not the poor side of town, it's not the rich side of town. It's a neighborhood, a community together. And I really think we need to get on this. This has been put off way too long in our community.
Well, Mr. Mayor, thank you for that clear proposal. Can I ask one clarifying question? And this really stems from our perhaps sloppiness, if I can use that word, in asking the question. On number three, you said 17%. Right. Would it be 17% of any combination of low and very low? Would you include moderate?
I think you have to have a fair mix between moderate, low, and very low income. I think that, because again, it doesn't create just one area that's used, well, this is really low income neighborhood or building, that's where the poor people live. This is a mix of everyone, so nobody gets singled out.
Okay. So you'd like to see every project required to have some very low, low, and moderates.
Absolutely. I think every project should have a mix. Instead of just single family homes, it should be a mix of some single family and multifamily. Within there, you could have the very low income, low, and of course some of the moderate within the single family.
Okay, well, just I do want to hear from the other members, but just to clarify, I assume, but I guess I shouldn't assume anything. Would it be acceptable to you if a single family developer said, I am going to build all single family homes, but I'm going to make some of them available to very low, low, and moderate income households? Or are you saying you want every development to also include multifamily units?
Personally, I want to start seeing a mix of in all new developments of multifamily within the single family. Again, it's going to start creating a community within a community, and not just single family homes over there, multifamily, you go across the street, and that's where they have some very low houses for you. I think we need to have a better blend in our community.
Okay. Well, just from a technical perspective, I think all the other ideas you've said sound to me like, I'm sure some people would say, I have concerns about the feasibility here. I do know that there are communities who do all the things you've just suggested. That last one, I think you will find in the development community an assertion, at least, that once they get started building a certain kind of product, as it might be called, in a certain subdivision, it's difficult to do a different product in that same subdivision. So all other things being equal, I think the development community would probably at least appreciate the option that, let's say they're building 100 single family homes, that they just dedicate 17 of those single family homes to those income categories, rather than needing to build 17 units in a multifamily development. But if that's the guidance from the GPAC, that's certainly what we'll include. But I'm not familiar with another city that makes that particular requirement.
Yeah, and I think this is in our community why we've become so heavy on the single family. It's always, we'll do it later, we'll do it in another neighborhood, and it never happens. And our community is being pushed out. So, I mean, the reality is most of our residents cannot afford these single family homes. And until we start including more multifamily within the mix, we're going to be pushing out our own residents. And I think it's time we make that turn now.
Okay. So let me just and review what we heard from you, and then we'll hear from others. So you said on the first one, yes, definitely a required program. Number two, it would be all types of developments that it would affect. Number three, it would be 17% with a requirement for at least some very low, low, and moderate in both, and it would be required that they be both in single family and multifamily developments. And lastly, you would not allow any alternatives. They would have to be complied with through actual construction of the units within the subdivision.
Yes.
All right, other comments?
I'd like to say that in my experience living here in in our city here, our beautiful city, is that what I would call a neighborhood is a place of a diversity of housing types and a diversity of income groups that is integrated into the context of where you're living, so that it creates a stability of the situation where older people or younger people have these opportunities and choices to live instead of having to go outside and live elsewhere because these housing opportunities are not in our neighborhoods of Hollister. So I totally agree with the mayor on that affordable housing needs to be integrated throughout our city. It cannot be sequestered in certain areas. It just doesn't work that way. And so I would agree that, yes, you look at our housing element, something needs to be done because what we have been doing in the past has not been working. So we do need this leverage. So I do agree that we do need inclusionary housing. And I also, as what I prefaced my statement is that we need different housing types. I think when you're talking about multi-unit development, it needs to have multi-unit apartments and rental opportunities. Also, it has to be integrated within these multi-unit developments or smaller developments throughout the city.
If I can.
Well, can I just, because I want to just keep track. So Commissioner Huboy, are you essentially supporting all the things the mayor said, or is there any divergence?
Yes, and I've seen it. It's worked. I've taken tours in Gilroy where you have these choices, and you cannot discern a well-designed multi-unit development. You can look at it and you cannot discern the income levels of the occupants because it can be, it's a matter of design. And also the benefits are, speak volumes where you have these choices so that you have a stability and you're building neighborhoods, not just housing.
Okay, great. So we've got two identical suggestions for guidance, and it sounded like Councilmember Resendez wanted to go next.
Councilmember Resendez wants to add a third to that. Just because it's not done regularly, that to me is the epitome of smart growth. We need people from all different types of backgrounds living together, going to school together, to where you cannot tell if one is low income and one's not. So I'm very much in favor of what both the mayor and Commissioner Huboy had spoke up about. As far as we're looking at the options, of course, number one, without a doubt. Number three, without a doubt. I would go 20% or higher if I could. It's just so needed here. And then no, we don't want any in lieu, no land dedication, no offsite construction units. That's what causes the problems where we don't have these communities living together and intermingling with each other and going to school with each other. We've got one side of town that has a little bit more better amenities than the other. So we need to put an end to that. And yeah, I very much support that. And I'm very strongly in favor of that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So before we hear from others, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I do want to ask just to make sure I'm not misunderstanding. I think all three of you have said that it would be very desirable, and I think I do understand this part, that when one enters a neighborhood, you look at the units and you can't tell who's living in an affordable one and who's living in a market rate one, which family is which. But then you've also said that you would want every development to include both single family homes and multifamily homes. And as I understood it, there was an assumption that the multifamily homes would be those that are of the lower income and the single family homes would be of the higher incomes. And then that says to me that it would be possible to know which income level is living in which unit. So because I'm not understanding those potential inconsistencies, I just want to make sure I'm understanding what your direction is on this question of requiring both single family and multifamily within the same development in order to try and get that indistinguishable mix of units.
So, Mr. Early, maybe I can help clarify that. I know what you're saying as far as the single family and the multifamily. So I'm not saying every single neighborhood can has to be that mix. So where there's single family, there should be multifamily. And there could be developments where it's all multifamily. But in those that do have the single family, that would have the mix of the moderate and the lower income also in the single family homes. So
Okay.
our residents have a chance to buy their single family home.
Right. So would maybe let me just make an alternative suggestion based on that. Perhaps it would be that up to a certain development size, relatively substantial, I'm going to say maybe 100 units, that up to 100 units could be a single type, single family or multifamily, but they would still, whether it's single family or multifamily, it would have to be at least 17% of the 3 affordable categories, as you've said, Mr. Mayor. If you got over 100 units, then you would be required to also have some mix, and we can look at the percentage that must, where that single subdivision must include both single and multifamily units.
If we were to go that direction, I would have that number be lower, maybe 30 to 40 max of the single family, because I've seen this where developers figure out the number and then that's where they cut it off. So we don't want to be in that situation either.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe we have, I'm not sure BAE stayed this evening, but there are experts on these kinds of development feasibility issues. So we can look with them at it. I'm certainly hearing your guidance on this, and we can try and find a way to do it that's still feasible.
That'd be great.
Comments from the other 4 members?
So
Yes, I would agree
go
with,
ahead,
I would agree with Roland. I think we need to have a higher percentage of homes that are considered low income, median income, very low income in each development. We have to remember that low income has always had this bad stereotype to it, and we have to remember that our kids, our own children, can't afford to buy houses. They can't afford to get into anything because everything is so high. So they would fall into those categories too. So, building a neighborhood, having, different types of people is not a bad thing, shouldn't be looked at as a bad thing. It should be looked at as a good thing. So you're going to have, people of different income levels living in the same neighborhoods, being neighbors and, interacting with each other, and their kids going to school together. And I think it's very important that we do that. So I would agree that, with Councilman Resendez on his figures as well.
Right. So if I could summarize, it sounds like that's a 4th statement in favor of all the things the mayor said, but that we might have a discussion at the very end here as to whether the number should be 17 or perhaps a higher number of 20 or even a bit above 20.
Yes.
Roxanne, did you want to comment further before, and then maybe we'll come to that question if we've got some unanimity on all the other points.
Yeah. So definitely agree that that there needs to be some expectation in place whenever there's a development for inclusionary housing. It has to be it has to be a requirement so that it will happen, because it's not happening, and we do need the mix. So I would agree for the first question 1, second question 3. The percentage, I'm not really sure what the percentage should be, because I don't know that I have enough information to make that, but my tendency would be that it probably needs to be a little bit higher than what's there. But I'm not really sure. So I would kind of lean towards the 20% at the very least, only because I think that there should be a mix, especially if we're talking about all the different types. So if we're saying low, the very low, the low, the moderate, then we should have a mix of all of those, right? So we're not having like the 20%, if this is what I'm understanding, it's not 20% very low, it's 20% with a mix of very low, low, and moderate, and then maybe there might be market rate for everything else. Right. So I think that is a small percentage if we're talking about all those 3 categories, because even the low and the moderate are still pretty high. I mean, when you think about what that pays for, it's still pretty high. But so that would be my push, is that if we're talking about all 3 categories, that we should, at the very least, I think we need 20%, maybe even higher. I'm not really clear, and I think I should be, but I'm not really clear exactly what we mean by payment of an in lieu housing fee. Maybe it means something else to me, but I haven't heard it stated in that way. So can you just tell me what that means?
So if let's start at the beginning of this process. If you're the developer and you were going to sell 100 houses all at market rate, and now you have a rule that says you have to sell 20 of them at a lower rate, at a lower price because of this rule, that costs you a certain amount of money.
Okay.
Lost
Okay.
profits, right?
Okay.
So the developer might say to you, well, instead of losing that money on those sales, could I just give you that money instead? You, the city of Hollister, you can put that money in your pocket and use it to build housing elsewhere. So
Okay.
the value is still captured by the city, but it's captured in payment of a money in lieu of building the housing units. And that's why it's called an in lieu fee.
Okay.
Money is paid in lieu of building the units. And what we've heard from the other speakers so far is not to do that, not to do number 2 or 3, and because what does happen, I think the mayor who said this first is right. Generally speaking, the pattern is that money might then get spent elsewhere in town by the city.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately we just have to make sure that there aren't any loopholes, that there are that this does in fact happen, so that, I mean, I think ultimately what I'm hearing the other GPAC members say, and what I would like to see, is that there is a mix of housing in all the neighborhoods, so that you don't go to one neighborhood that seems to be like the low income neighborhood, but that in fact that they're all kind of mixed. It's not that we're going to mistaken a rental unit as if that's going to be as much as a single family home that, you know, is 4 bedrooms, 3 baths. I mean, obviously the price is different, but it's just about, we don't want to have like all of one side of town to look a certain way and then the other side to look a different way. We really want it all to look really nice, and having inclusionary housing makes that easier to accomplish. So obviously I'm agreeing with what everybody else is saying, and I think that the percentage should be at the very least 20%.
Okay, I was just going to ask Carrie, actually, if we should wrap up soon, and I think we're getting good guidance, but Carrie, can you tell us from the matrix we put together, what's the highest percentage of any of the categories combined, without regard to what category they are, but if you add them all up, what's the highest percentage of any individual jurisdiction that we've surveyed?
So for my scan, I'm seeing 20% as the highest.
And Matt Coda, who is here still from BAE, he pointed out that the state requires certain analyses. If you want to go above 15%, I think we can probably accomplish those analyses. But you should understand that there's a chance that we might come back to you and say, actually, by state law, 15 is the highest we can require. But I think that's we can work with that with your guidance. So I'm aware of time too. It's 8:26 right now. I think we've got clear guidance on every item in this list, that we do want to have a program. It will apply to all unit types. It will apply to all, it will be a combined moderate, low, and very low, adding up to some percentage, and there will not be an ability to get out of it, so to speak, by paying a fee or building elsewhere. And the one question I want to look at is whether you want 17, 20, or some other number. And all of this, you know, you can change it later. This kind of thing, once we put the general plan to you, I'm sure there will be further discussion, and it'll just be a matter of changing a digit in the general plan. So this isn't a finished decision, but we do want to get guidance as to whether you'd like us to draft this at 17, 20, or some other number.
For me, the minimum would be 20%.
Mr. Mayor, you spoke most clearly in favor of 17. How would you feel about going to 20, which some of the other GPAC members have suggested?
I have absolutely no problem going with 20, and I want to thank the other members. I wanted to have a number that was not going to be too controversial and a fight to the end, but I'm so pleased to hear them all talking about 20%, and I fully support 20% with them.
Great. Okay. And I think
If I could chime in too, this is Chris. I agree. One thing that we haven't said, which is going to be huge, is the positive impact it'll have on schools and our students. So I definitely agree with with having it 20%, but also I do agree with what the mayor said wholeheartedly about 17 and not having a battle, because we know how Hollister can get sometimes. And so I agree with them with, if you want to be conservative, that 17% would be a conservative number.
Yeah, so I think the guidance then is that we'll go ahead and work from 20. We'll try to come up with a program based on that 20% number. Then it will include very low, low, and moderate. And then, of course, there will be ongoing public discussion once the draft general plan is actually published. I'm sure this will be one of the key issues to be discussed. And at that time, if the number is dropped from 20 to 17 or something else, like I said, it will be relatively easy for us to change it. So I think that gives us the guidance for this evening, unless anybody wants to add anything about this.
Well, and just to clarify something that you said earlier about the requirements from the state, if we do pick, so we go with the 20, we still have to do some justification for the state, and then we may end up at 17 anyway, if we don't meet whatever justification.
Right, and if the justification doesn't work at all, my understanding is you would be capped at 15. But Matt, you don't need to say more right now, but unless you have anything you can add to really clarify this, but otherwise, Matt, maybe you can just confirm that we can do the analysis and we'll come in as close to 20 as the analysis allows. Anything to add there, Matt Cota?
Yeah, hi, David. So if you're 15% or under, you've got a bit of a safe harbor, not going to require economic analysis. If you go over, it's not guaranteed that you're going to have economic analysis, but it may be necessary if you're getting challenges as to the economic feasibility of doing that. So, some jurisdictions are just going with something at 15% or less, so they're avoiding the potential for challenges and so forth.
So we'll get more information on that to the entire GPAC and to the council and the public, obviously, in the next round. But I think, Matt, from what you're saying, we can at least aim for a higher number than 15 and see how that looks once we get all the policies put together. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's nothing to stop that approach.
All right, great. Okay, any last comments or questions about that before we end?
I think you have a speaker, an attendee that has her hand raised.
Okay, I don't see that. We haven't, Mr. Mayor, you are the chair here, of course, but is it, I don't see the hand raised actually, and we haven't been, but that's probably because I'm looking at the wrong folks. We haven't been recognizing people through the meeting. If we do recognize folks now, I'm not sure what precedent it creates. Do you want to, it is Janet Grist who would like to speak. Do you want to do that? And would we take other speakers too? How do you want to work that?
I just think since we're ending the meeting now, if that's the last of the conversation, I don't mind at the very end.
Okay, all right.
Public input.
All right, so and I want to wrap up also with just a reminder of our next meetings, but let's first recognize Ms. Grist, and then we can go from there. Is Ms. Grist on? Yeah, I think now you should be able to speak now. Ms. Grist, you may need to unmute yourself first. I don't know who can unmute you.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I clicked that a long time ago, so it's okay.
All right. Okay,
No
thank
problem.
you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Well, I think that then does conclude our meeting. I want to remind you all that we do have 3 more meetings coming up of the same sort. The next meeting is perhaps the most complicated. We have a smaller number of issues, but they're all map-based, and there's a lot of variables and pieces. That's next week, Tuesday, April 6th. We'll be looking at growth management, special planning areas, and residential land use designations. And then we have a couple that I hope will be a lot more fun. On Tuesday, April 13th, we'll be looking at arts and culture. Then we have a break for a week. And then on Tuesday, April 27th, we'll be looking at greenhouse gas emissions, climate change, natural hazards, the local hazard mitigation plan, and sustainability as well. So those 3 more meetings coming up. I want to thank you members of the GPAC for doing just an extraordinary job on these items. We've gotten through at exactly 8:30 at the end of both of our first 2 meetings. And we'll do 3 more. And then in May and June, we'll be having meetings before the Planning Commission and City Council to make sure that we have their concurrence that we're moving in the right direction. And then we'll get into the work of actually preparing the general plan for you that you'll be seeing in the late summer or early fall. So Mr. Mayor, I don't know if you have any parting words, and otherwise we can close the meeting.
I also want to thank all the members and all the members of the public that attended tonight's meeting. This is going very, very well. And I want to thank you again, Mr. Early, and your staff, and of course the city staff for all the hard work they're doing. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn from the members?
I motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I'll second the motion.
The motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.